So, do you know if outside they're having the bell now to get people in, or how is that working? So if maybe somebody could just check, that would be great. So that give us a signal when we can start. Okay. I don't know how it is outside. Are there still many people outside? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes, individual presentations, because this is a closing plenary, so we have lots of discussions already. So and I need still a bit of time to this. I want to thank you from the organizers. So I was asked to do the normal position. We have an hour, but at least you are welcome to speak either from the studio or from the lecture. Some of our panelists will also speak from the lecture. You can choose. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this closing plenary of these amazing 2 days. I think you will all agree with me that we have had fantastic discussions. I learned a lot in the last 2 days here. We are going to bring this together now in this closing plenary that I have the pleasure to facilitate. My name is Gino van Begin. I'm the Secretary General of ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, an organization of more than 1,000 cities that we accompany on their path towards sustainability. But I'm also a member of the board of the Global Infrastructure Basel, and therefore it is a pleasure for me to be here on this panel and to help you in introducing you and bringing your messages to our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking about climate issues, sustainability issues, infrastructure issues, city issues, the role of financing in particular, but all this to make basically our planet a more safe and sustainable place to live in. And this is really the essence of what we have been discussing, and I guess also for most of us, the work that we are doing. Let me just start by giving you a couple of facts of today. Cities represent 1.3% of the planetary space, so actually very, very small. But in the cities, we consume 73% of all energy. And we contribute, therefore, also to more than 70% of the CO2 emissions. But also, growth is taking place in cities. 80% of global GDP is being generated in cities. If you then add up some of the trends that we are seeing, first trend, rapid urbanization. Today, 3.5 billion people live in urban areas, but another 3.5 billion people will be living in urban areas in the next 35 years, 40 years. So basically what we are talking about is that the infrastructure that we have set up, let's say in the last 4,000 years in urban areas, we need to generate the same infrastructure, a better infrastructure for another 3.5 billion people, not in 4,000 years, but in 40 years. So the challenge is immense. Second trend, poverty. We need to ensure that we get more people included into our quality of life. Still, 1.6 billion people live with less than $2 a day. 600 million people have no access to electricity. 1.7 billion people have limited access to sanitation. And 1/3 of our urban areas are slums. Possibly 1 billion people will be living in slums. So again, the need for sustainable infrastructure is immense if you just add on this second trend. Third trend, demand in energy. Our demand in energy, if we continue to use and to work and to live and use in particular fossil fuels as we are doing today, it will mean that we will need 30% more energy than we are having already today. But at the same time, and where we know that in terms of fossil fuels, it is available, we also know that we can only use 1/3 of the actual proved oil reserves that are available worldwide today. So that means that we have come to a moment in time where we need a comprehensive global plan of how we are going to deal with the facts and with these trends and bring it together so that from a planetary point of view, we can still live in a safe way. So that means that we will have to look towards national governments. National governments have to make changes in their policies. Some are doing this. Look at Germany. Other countries are getting away from nuclear, moving towards renewable. Some countries are already totally dependent on renewable energy and are not using fossil fuels. We will be looking and needing the cities to actually ensure that when they construct new infrastructure, that this is sound infrastructure that actually will produce energy and not consume energy. That they retrofit the existing infrastructure to such extent that we become more energy efficient. And that our mobility is becoming independent from fossil fuels. We will need the financing institutions to look into other ways of just having a monetary return, but also a qualitative return in terms of quality of life. And we will need to look towards our civil society and the citizens and to bring them on board in this shift that we actually need to be achieving. I think that in this closing plenary, you will hear for some of our panelists, and therefore we have invited also representatives of each of these sectors, some of the things that are ongoing right now and where they try to contribute in their own individual perspectives. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to therefore introduce to you Ambassador Michael Gerber, the Special Representative for Global Sustainable Development of the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs in Berne. Mr. Gerber, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers very much for inviting me to speak today in this last plenary at the end of such an exciting and thought-provoking 2 days, and discussions you've had. I'm very pleased to be here in my capacity as Special Representative for Switzerland for Global Sustainable Development. And my main task currently is to represent Switzerland in negotiations at the United Nations to define a new set of sustainable development goals that shall unite the international community to tackle the joint challenges of poverty eradication and sustainability. With this new global goal framework, the Millennium Agenda, with its Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, which will come to an end in 2015, and the Rio Agenda, since the Earth Summit in '92, will converge into one single agenda. But before entering into details here, please allow me to take a look at the most pressing global challenges which actually drive this political process. In identifying the factors that will shape the future global agenda for sustainable development, probably few will have more impact than the size, structure, and distribution of the world's population, as also was recently stated by the UN Secretary General in his report on world demographic trends. Allow me to recall a few statistics, just to follow the example of Gino van Begin, who already mentioned many critical numbers here. According to UN estimates, the world's population is currently at 7.2 billion, with approximately 82 million being added every year, and roughly a quarter of this growth occurring in the least developed countries. On this current trajectory, the world's population is expected to reach 1.1 billion in 2025 and 9.6 billion, almost 10 billion, in 2050. Where population is then expected to stabilize. From a demographic perspective, countries are more diverse today than at any previous point in history. Currently, 54% of population growth is in Asia and 33% in Africa. By 2050, however, more than 80% of the global increase will take place in Africa, with only 12% in Asia. Europe, on the other hand, is projected to experience population decline after 2020. As you are all aware, more than half of the global population lives in cities and towns, and it is expected that up to 70% will live in urban areas by 2050. Urban centers have become the dominant habitat for humankind, and it will thus shape the future dynamics of human development, particularly in the developing world. Cities of emerging economies are expected to double from 2 to 4 billion people within 30 years, between 2000 and 2030, accompanied by a tripling of their physical footprint from 200,000 to 600,000 square kilometer. This places urbanization among the most significant global trends of the 21st century. Urban infrastructure has direct impact on economic development, climate change, preservation of the natural environment, and, last but not least, the social well-being of any country's population. For too long, urbanization has been viewed as unmanageable, as happening too fast, or as something to be resisted. Now, it must be understood that urbanization is not only inevitable, but above all, an extremely powerful force in support of sustainable development and poverty eradication. This means that the real needs for infrastructure must be addressed in a way that meets the challenges of urbanization, as well as responding to the specific needs for services such as energy supply. Ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned at the beginning, following on from the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, and the Rio +20 Summit in 2012, the international community is currently attempting to come together to set global goals addressing linked challenges of poverty eradication and sustainability. These new global goals, called Sustainable Development Goals, or short SDGs, will of course also build on existing initiatives such as the Secretary General's partnerships, for example, the Sustainable Energy for All initiative, which you all know. Many countries, such as Switzerland, strive to make the SDGs an ambitious and transformative agenda, meaning an agenda for real change. Implementing this new framework will require a change of paradigm in many ways. First, the new goals will be universal, which means that every country will have to contribute to their achievement, of course, while taking into consideration each country's capacities. Hence, the new agenda will not be an agenda anymore defined by donors for recipient countries where they have to be implemented, as it was the case with the MDGs. Second, the three dimensions of sustainable development, so the economic, social, and the environmental dimension, shall be integrated in a balanced way, in contrast to the MDGs, which have a strong focus on the social dimension. With this integrative approach, root causes of poverty, inequality, and environmental challenges shall be addressed. Third, the implementation of this ambitious agenda for sustainable development will require a new and truly global partnership, involving all actors contributing to development all around the world: civil society, private sector, academia, politicians, foundations, the multilateral system, etc. Let us take a closer look at some of the topics we have been discussing in depth during the last 2 days. Many topics under discussion as potential sustainable development goals and targets, such as, for instance, climate change, water, energy, sanitation, but also migration, safe livelihoods, health, employment, or economic development. All these issues or targets, goals cannot be reached without getting infrastructure problems and urbanization right. This means, above all, addressing changes at the societal level, including housing, clean water, communication systems, a strong functioning public health system, regulated utilities, and energy-efficient public transport systems. The deficiencies associated with unreliable and insufficient infrastructure provision, especially in cities, put greater pressure on local governments and city leaders, in particular on their capacities to properly plan and finance sustainable infrastructure services. Based on this, for Switzerland, a potential future sustainable development goal on sustainable, resilient, and inclusive cities would have to include sustainable infrastructure, energy, water and sanitation, etc., all the topics I mentioned before, to name but a few. Targets related to urban management, urban capacity, urban knowledge, urban planning, and urban financing should be agreed at the global level, so as to emphasize the concept of our shared responsibility. But they will have to be broken down, of course, to specific targets at the national level, recognizing, of course, that all countries do not have the same starting point or the same capacities to address these challenges. For cities and infrastructure in particular, traditional public sector funding sources, such as municipal taxes, fiscal transfers, user charges, and lease of land, are by far insufficient to bridge the urban infrastructure gap. Alternative financing sources for urban infrastructure projects are provided, inter alia, the capital markets, private institutional investors, bi- and multilateral agencies, as well as export credit agencies. To further engage with potential investors, it will also be critical for cities to proactively improve the technical and financial structuring of the projects to strengthen their confidence in the project's viability. In that regard, capacity building measures to support city administrations are of vital importance. Ladies and gentlemen, a universal agenda for sustainable development means changing the North-South paradigm and thinking much more broadly about the means of implementation than we did under the more broadly about the means of implementation than we did under the traditional development paradigm as defined by the MDGs. Moving from conventional infrastructure to sustainable infrastructure improves the livelihoods of billions of people, north and south, east and west. There is a clear realization that traditional development financing sources will not be enough. We need to catalyze and build on possibilities for engagement among partners across governments, international organizations, civil society, and, of course, the private sector. In order to unleash this potential, the added value of sustainability has to be demonstrated and made accessible to capital markets and particularly to institutional investors. Only a very small part of the concrete implementation of these new partnerships will involve the United Nations, and this proportion is even insignificant if we focus on urbanization and infrastructure. So to conclude, we could ask ourselves, why is this UN process relevant? Well, one of the main arguments for me is that it creates momentum for joint action through a process that is uniquely participative and legitimate. The priorities are agreed by the 193 UN member states together, drawing inputs from civil society, private sector, international financial and development institutions, and many others. The MDGs were already game-changing because they provided a clear and easy-to-understand agenda for future development at the time. They were truly embraced by member states and provided a common language between partners for development. And I hope not to exaggerate by stating that we can expect the Sustainable Development Goals to provide the similar, if not greater, momentum. And I invite you all to contribute to keeping this momentum beyond 2015 when implementing this new agenda for a global sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gerber, for clarifying the position of Switzerland, and we encourage you to get all other nations on board on your positions, and that indeed we get the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particularly an urban Sustainable Development Goal being agreed by September next year. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like now to give the floor to the Executive Mayor of Parks Tau, the Mayor of Johannesburg. Please, Mr. Parks Tau.
Thank you very much and good afternoon to everybody. Let me first thank the organizers for inviting us to share in some of the work that we are doing in the city of Johannesburg. We certainly think that it is an opportunity to be here to interact with the whole range of role players in networking, but also creating opportunities for partnerships and relationships between ourselves and various role players that could contribute to us attaining our vision and objectives as the city of Johannesburg. The city of Johannesburg in 2011, some 5 months after the local government elections, adopted a long-term strategy and vision, Joburg 2040, growth and development strategy. The strategy is premised on a vision that seeks to build Johannesburg into a resilient, sustainable, and livable city, understanding the key challenges that we confront as a city and as the economic hub of the country and certainly of the continent. We as the city of Johannesburg are confronting a whole range of issues with regards to infrastructure and services. Amongst others, we have to respond to the reality that we inherited a city post-apartheid that did not provide for all the people to have equitable access to infrastructure, municipal infrastructure. So we inherited a backlog of infrastructure. We also inherited an environment in which there was a need to recapitalize infrastructure in the city of Johannesburg, aging infrastructure, whilst at the same time accepting that we are a city that's growing at a phenomenal rate, an estimated 120,000 people come into Johannesburg every year. So it is a city that has to confront the reality of migration and urbanization. So if you look at it in the census period 2001, Johannesburg had an estimated 3.2 million people, and the census 2011 produced some 4.4 million people in Johannesburg, and it's continuing to grow at that phenomenal rate. So our growth and development strategy had to be responsive to all these challenges and enable us to build the city in line with the vision that we've developed. Out of this growth and development strategy, we identified 4 outcomes, 23 outputs, and a number of indicators per output, and I won't go into those. Safe to say that we've identified in the first decade of the growth and development strategy 10 priority implementation plans. So for the first decade, these are the sort of game changers. This would range from spatial restructuring of the city, increasing density, increasing intensity of land uses. But this would also include financial sustainability, financial restructuring of our city, and would include resource resilience, building a smart city, and a whole range of other indicators. As I said, these are 10 priority implementation plans. But for the purpose of our discussion this afternoon, I will look at only 3 of these, and these would be resource sustainability, the second being, and closely linked to resource sustainability, building a green stroke blue economy in our city. And lastly, the issue about financial restructuring and financial sustainability of our city. With regards to resource sustainability, we identified the resource envelope, so to say, in our city, if I may use those words. We identified, for example, that the city is fast running out of landfill airspace. Therefore, we need to start thinking actively about how we manage waste going forward. We also identified the reality that we are a city that, unlike most cities around the world, was developed not along a major watercourse, river or sea. So we're a city that's built around mining land, and therefore we have to import all our water into the city of Johannesburg from the neighboring country of Lesotho. Therefore, water resources are an important issue with regards to resources. Excuse me. For some reason, there's a frog that found its way into my throat, so please excuse that. And the reality is that the country has decided that, amongst others, one of the interventions with regards to water is that a city like Johannesburg would have to reduce its water demand starting from next year at about 15%. So there's an allocation of water supply into our city, and we have to reduce water demand from next year by 15%. So from a resource point of view, water is a critical area of intervention. But with regards to electricity, we are essentially a coal-fired country. We have abundance, well, you can't always say abundance of fossil fuels, but we have huge coal reserves in the country, and our electricity is essentially coal-generated power stations. And the country has made conscious decisions about the transition into renewable and cleaner energy sources. So that places the challenge of resource sustainability as critical, not just for us as a city, but certainly for the country. For us to be able to achieve that, we've identified a number of programs, some of them currently being implemented and some of them are in the pipeline, so to say. And I'll just share on a few of the projects that we're currently undertaking in the city of Johannesburg. With regards to the first issue that I raised, which relates to waste management. We have essentially 8 landfill sites in the city of Johannesburg, 5 of which we've now transacted with a private service provider on a landfill gas-to-energy project. The project is currently capturing at 3 of these landfill sites methane gas, currently flaring. We were awaiting a power purchase agreement, which is now part of the discussions with the National Electricity Utility, but also we're awaiting an independent power producer license, which was granted in October last year. The anticipation is that we should, from about mid-next year, be able to convert landfill methane gas to energy. So we'll be able to implement this project to its fruition and be able to expand to the other landfill sites that we have in the city of Johannesburg. We've also looked at wastewater to energy, the conversion of sludge and biogas into energy, implemented from towards the end of last year in one of the wastewater treatment plants. We're now generating 30% of our energy requirements for the wastewater treatment plant from the sludge in our wastewater treatment plant. And we'd in fact be unveiling early next month the second wastewater treatment plant where we'll be generating energy directly from the sludge and therefore biogas into energy from our wastewater treatment plant. We've also looked at programs with regards to alternative energy sources with regards to the propulsion of our municipal buses. We run two systems. We have a metropolitan bus company that needs recapitalization. We currently are adjudicating about 150 of those buses on a dual fuel mix that uses biogas/diesel as the fuel source. We've run a pilot project since February this year when we hosted the C40 conference in Johannesburg earlier this year, and we are adjudicating for 150 new buses. Of course, we are also looking at, and I think Marco shared some of the discussions that we're having about retrofitting some of our buses, but also in terms of the BRT buses, also moving into a fuel switch technology as part of the propulsion of our metropolitan bus fleet. Excuse me, the frog has just found its way. Thank you. The city is also rolling out projects, particularly to poorer households, of the solar water geysers that are essentially provided to social housing schemes throughout the city, currently standing at 40,000 and continuing to be rolled out. We anticipate in the next 3 years to have covered about 120,000 social housing schemes with solar water geysers, so that they are able to generate at least warm water from their own geysers. Talking about geysers, we are currently finalizing a business model or business case and would be entering the market on a scheme designed to have photovoltaic panels, rooftop photovoltaic panels on a transactional basis that would enable trading into the grid by property owners in the city of Johannesburg, where we empower people to be able to invest in their own PV, but also be able to transact through smart meters into the grid access energy. So we call it in South Africa a virtual power station. So you're able to generate the energy for both domestic use, but also on sale into the grid. No doubt, as the city of Johannesburg, we're conscious of the reality that having spoken about this needs to be backed about. These new technologies need to be backed by the ability to generate local enterprises and local job creation. We continue to face significant challenges with regards to unemployment, inequality, and poverty in our country. So for us, all these projects and the design and choice of technology is always informed by the opportunity to meet multiple objectives, sustainability objectives, but also be able to deal with the social objectives and economic objectives, and meet, of course, the challenges with regards to unemployment and poverty that we have in our city and country. So every time we look at a project, green economy is one of the key indicators of how, in fact, we look at our sustainability projects and how we package the projects for purposes of dealing with the overall set of challenges that we confront as a country. So I won't go into the detail, given the amount of time, of how, in fact, on all these projects, we've evaluated them against green economy objectives. Safe to say that consciously we're implementing these sustainable initiatives with the understanding of incubating and facilitating green economy initiatives. What this has meant, however, is that we've had to expand our capital investment program significantly in the city of Johannesburg. If I may just give an indication, the rand-dollar exchange, South African rand, our currency dollar exchange is estimated as 1:10 as an average. So if you look at it from that point of view, when we started in 2011, we were investing about 3.9 million South African rands in capital infrastructure. And we've now moved it. In fact, we'll be presenting to our council next week a proposed budget that starts, of course, our financial year starts in July, of 10.8 billion rands. Now, that's a significant increase in capital investment by the city. We determined that we need to be investing at the rate of an average 10 billion, 11 billion rands a year rather, to be able to meet our challenges, taking into account, of course, the resources at our disposal. We do think that there is appetite, or we can say that there's appetite to expand depending on the nature of financing sources and schemes and partnerships that we can be able to develop in line with the various schemes that we've developed in the city of Johannesburg. And of course, as I said in my introduction, the opportunity over the past 2 days has been to interact with a whole range of players about potential areas of investments and partnerships in the city of Johannesburg. We are, of course, looking forward, Ambassador, to agreements on carbon funding going forward, but would continue to argue that whilst we no doubt support the need to have sovereign signed and sovereign agreed mechanisms, it's important that the mechanisms are also designed to meet the needs and challenges of local government so that in fact it becomes easier. Our experience with at least 3 of the projects that I've spoken about has been the difficulty of accessing financing mechanisms by local government, particularly if you look at the extent to which as South African cities and African cities we've participated in the market. It's been very, very low. And we think that going forward, it's going to be important that the mechanisms are designed in a way that creates ease of access for local government and municipalities, because that's really where the rubber hits the road in reality in terms of the work that we do. So we think that it's important that those are designed to respond to our needs. But we as a city of Johannesburg have great appetite to look at various financing instruments from a whole range of players we've explored. We're issuing the first green bond in the country. Is it Friday next week? Khomotso is our treasurer. On Friday next week, immediately after passing the budget for the next year. So we are now exploring green bonds as a funding instrument. Of course, we have to transact in South African rands, but I can say comfortably that the spreads are quite wide, so there's great opportunity to interact with us in the city of Johannesburg and look at both project financing, but also financing the municipality and its own capital program. So for us, we think that there is great opportunity to have discussions and to look at the various projects as the city that we have, but to also look at us as an institution and look at how we can enter into relationships and financing mechanisms that can help us expand our capital investment program, or at least meet our capital investment requirements in the city of Joburg. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Executive Mayor Parks Tau of Johannesburg. Thank you for sharing with us what you are doing in your city. Great leadership. We congratulate you. Thank you so much. I would like now to turn to Mayor Ratna Jain from the city of Kota in India. Please, Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here with you and express my views. The Kyoto Protocol, as we all know, inadvertently resulted in the placing of climate policy and development in 2 separate boxes, but it's now a glorious history and we all agree that the development must be green and sustainable to make planet livable. And therefore, climate policy must be an integral part of the development policy and all the plans. Well, I won't go into the details of sustainable development goals as it has been already discussed. And well, these 3 slides were not for you because you are all experts, and these are for politicians like me. Without sustainable energy, we will not be able to meet Millennium Development Goals, that is for sure. And the sustainable development is not possible without sustainable energy. And so let us come together and work to bring sustainable energy to the developing countries. The race is on, and it's time to lead. India is among the countries which are not producing, who is not producing much greenhouse gases, and there is less pollution comparatively. But of course, we are trying tangible efforts in the direction of green actions, green energy, and green growth. For overcoming the problems of initial high cost of green solutions, we need funds. We need to cooperate with other companies and other infrastructure, large-scale capital ventures for our projects. And the win-win situations can be made possible by funding in green development activities in the developing countries like India. Of course, there should be some green climate funding available to such developing countries. India is all set to be the global leader in solar energy, especially because we have the area in the solar energy sector. Some large projects have been proposed, and a large area of 35,000 kilometers square of the Thar Desert has been set aside for solar power projects, sufficient to generate 700 to 2100 gigawatt. We have a lot of human resource. We have talented youth because India would be the youngest country. And we have all type of human resources. And of course, if the funding reaches to the grassroots level, it will be worth to have projects, big projects, and we'll be able to work for the long-term sustainable projects. I'll tell something about my city. My city is in the list of million plus urban cities, and it is a 53rd city of India. And as we are talking about rapid urbanization, of course, we need so many things along with it. That is, we need energy, we need drainage system, sewage system, we need to have solid waste management and wastewater treatment, and all these projects need money. And large money is required, lot of money is required, and for that, we need your help. For example, my city needs affordable green housing, and we need to have rooftop solar power projects. And one thing I would like to tell you, that my city is a special city in India where we have more than 100,000 students coming from all over the country. Young, talented students, most talented ones. They come there to pursue for medical and engineering education. They come for preparation of the competitive exams for the entrance into medical and engineering colleges. And so they study there for 2 to 3 years, and then they get selected. Most of them, many of them, thousands of them get selected for Indian Institute of Technology and other engineering colleges. And finally, when they grow up, they move into all the parts of the country, and also they move globally. And if at all all the green practices we do in Kota, that will be a very good learning for them. And of course, for these students only, those who are not selected, we want to have good universities for them, an education hub for them, especially environmental universities, if we can have in Kota. That will be very good for the country as well as for the globe. As a Dr. Mayor, health and environment are my utmost priority, and I'm sure with your help and with capacity building in conferences like this, I'll be able to do something for my city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Jain. From a middle-sized city, but rapidly growing, and we are looking forward to your further leadership in steering the city on the right path of sustainability. Thank you very much for your contribution here today. Let me now turn to the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, particularly Diana Jensen, who is Director for Renewable Energy Financing, based in Washington, D.C. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. First, I would like to thank Daniel for his kind invitation to include me in this summit. This is the first year that OPIC has participated, and it's been really a wonderful 2 days, and I met a lot of interesting people with interesting ideas and backgrounds, and it's really been very much an experience for me to be able to reach out more outside of my own institution and have a better understanding of other roles that people are playing, obviously, in this whole area of sustainable finance. So as a starting point, I thought it would be useful to give a broad overview of OPIC. I'm sure most of you have probably not heard of OPIC. It is the U.S. government's, where am I pointing here? Yeah. It's the U.S. government's development finance institution. So earlier yesterday, we had presentations from colleagues at the Inter-American Development Bank, also from the International Finance Corporation. So OPIC's mission is quite similar to these institutions. So we look at how do we facilitate U.S. investment in emerging markets and merge that with developmental goals and also our own foreign policy initiatives. So as you can see from the few bullet points up here, we're looking at broad-based sustainable economic growth in the areas where we're targeting. We're looking at specific regions and specific sectors that need support, and how to look at advancing especially clean energy. It's been very much a priority of OPIC since the Obama administration entered a few years back. And it has continued to be a powerful tool for us to go into emerging markets and see what we can do to support all elements of not only renewable energy, but energy efficiency, clean water. So it has a broad-ranging reach. And as a point here, our current portfolio stands at $16 billion. And so that is the number of projects we have under management, either through our finance department, our political risk insurance department, or our investment funds group. And here's a quick look at some of our alliances, because it really has changed. When I first came to OPIC, I think it was an agency of less than 200 people, and even today we're only about 250, 270 people. And it was very easy for us to sort of sit in our offices and, companies would come to us with a proposal. We want to build a power plant, or we want to build a factory. And, we would go through this process of approving and lending the money. And in more recent years, OPIC has really made an effort of outreach to establish relationships with not only just other U.S. government institutions, but, private sector companies, NGOs, institutional investors. So this gives you a sense of some of the investors that we work with on a routine basis today. Other U.S. government agencies, including Department of Energy and Millennium Challenge Corporation, which does a lot of development work, and also other development banks come in as co-lenders on the large transactions with us. And then we try to keep connections on the ground through our embassies and U.S. government agencies that are represented in countries around the world. And currently, we're open in 160 countries for our programs. And this is just a quick look at some of our investment priorities. Renewable resources is by far the most important priority. You can see there that we made a commitment of $1.6 billion in projects in the 2012 fiscal year. And that in looking at also not certainly secondary, but other sectors that we're focused on is the Middle East, North Africa region, and very much now Sub-Saharan Africa under the Obama administration's Power Africa initiative. And then also looking at strategic sectors, including, agriculture or key countries, housing. So there are a lot of sector focus and teams in the agency, microfinance, that have a specific sector focus. And then, of course, impact investing. We have a couple people who solely try to develop relationships with foundations and NGOs and look at how to bring money to these projects where there is a real impact investment goal among the shareholder group. And this shows you the dramatic change in the last few years. When I first started at OPIC, a renewable project was a hydro project. And that started to change very rapidly in 2009. And we did a few solar projects. In fact, in that year, we did the very first grid-connected solar power project in India, owned by private investors. It was a 2-megawatt project in Punjab. And we've supported that investor with more projects in that country in the solar sector. And so you can see here this growth has been, the efforts that we've brought to this, to this sector have really sort of borne out here in the improvement of our support over, the last 5 years. And here's just a few examples of some of the types of projects we've been involved in. Sort of modular housing in Haiti that followed the hurricane. In India, we've done a project bringing clean water into villages. In Iraq, we worked on affordable housing project. In Ghana, there was political risk insurance to increase clean water access there. And India, we recently made a commitment to applied solar technologies. They're going to be putting solar panels on the top of the telecom towers. And then also in Peru, we recently supported Contour Global for a large wind project there. So that sort of gives you a flavor of the range of the types of investments we support. And there at the top, we basically highlighting that in the 41 years of OPIC's existence, we've supported over $200 billion in investment in developing markets. And here at this section of the presentation, I just want to quickly hit on some of the initiatives because one of the topics for our group is what are the policy considerations and how are we, in my institution or in our cities and our governments, how are we supporting sustainable finance and what real tangible measures are being taken? And OPIC supports both by creating internal policies in support of these goals, but also external, in this case, global or U.S. government policies. So the Power Africa is a very important initiative. Under this initiative, all the U.S. government agencies have committed more than $7 billion over the next 5 years to support power in Africa. OPIC's commitment is for $1.5 billion, and I've listed there the key countries, which are Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Liberia, Nigeria, and Tanzania. So the overall goal is to add 10,000 megawatts and increase access to 20 million new households, and to try to do this in support of public-private partnerships and bringing everybody involved to meet this ambitious goal. Another major initiative is the U.S. Africa Clean Energy Finance Initiative, ACIF. This is an internal OPIC program that is aimed at bringing money to early-stage projects. which we've discussed over the last 2 days, is sometimes an issue. So how do you bring money in earlier when maybe some technical assistance is needed, some sort of feasibility study, to get the project to really when it would be at a stage that a financial institution would be interested in looking at it for financing. And here are a couple of projects where we've provided some funding, project in Morocco and a project in Rwanda, to get it to that sort of financing stage. And then also we've started something with other government agencies, the U.S. State Department and U.S. Trade and Development Agency, called the Asia Pacific Clean Energy Program. And as of next month, we will have a full-time OPIC person in Bangkok in support of this initiative in looking at Asia specifically and how we can support Asia in its clean energy goals. And then just very quickly, a couple other regional and sector priorities. There's a new initiative called Beyond the Grid that OPIC has become involved in and attending a lot of meetings within the government and you know, with other international institutions, that is becoming a more critical focus for the U.S. government to look at how we can participate in supporting, you know, micro projects essentially in very rural areas. And also now we're very carefully looking at Central America Caribbean Initiative, and we're sending someone to set up an office in Miami, Florida, to focus on the Caribbean region and looking at how these islands can become potentially incorporate renewable energy as a way to function more sustainably. The cost of fuel clearly for these island nations is extremely high. And that's become a more critical initiative in the U.S. government. So I think this sort of lays out who we are as an institution, what are some of the, you know, policy initiatives that we're supporting, and, you know, where we're trying to focus our efforts. I think the one thing that I wanted to close with is that in looking at the information that people have been sharing over the past couple of days, it seems pretty clear to me that a lack of funding is not really the fundamental issue here. I mean, if you look at OPIC alone, we have a $16 billion portfolio. We have a statutory limit of $29 billion. That means we haven't even, we've used just over half of what we can lend. We have $13 billion to lend that is not being lent. That's an awful lot of money for a lot of projects. So my view is that it really continues to be an effort to how to get these parties together so that these projects can be financed. I mean, they're institutional investors, foundations. The money is available from a lot of institutions who are looking for an investment, but how do we get it into the emerging markets? How do we get it into, you know, these sustainable projects, or focusing on renewable energy or energy efficiency or municipal water supply or lighting? There are so many types of projects that can be supported with this kind of funding. So I think that the effort that all of us need to make is to figure out how to continue to have these conversations and meet each other and bring the parties together so that we can actually deploy these funds and get them into the marketplace. So that concludes, and certainly anybody wants to call me or reach me, happy to continue to brainstorm about what we can do to meet these challenges. And again, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Diane, and I think your concluding sentences very much capture, I think, the feeling of all of us here over the last 2 days. And indeed, it seems that it's really is an issue of trying to bring people together. And I think this is what Global Infrastructure Basel is trying to do. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you also for sharing your inside views and the programmatic priorities of the organization you represent. Let us move from the US to China, and Alex Zhang, the Managing Director of Ecoforum Global. Please, Alex, interesting initiative you're going to talk about, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Let me start by convey a heartfelt appreciation and congratulations to the organizer of this summit, the Global Infrastructure Basel. I think in the past 2 days, I'm just like everybody else, has learned so much from different panels, projects, different organizations, from UN system to sovereign government, civil societies, and the business sectors. Our panel like to throw in some numbers. I want to pick some numbers I learned in the past few days just to show how important that all of us gathering here together to talking about this issue. Estimated $100 trillion or about 5 trillion annually is required between now and 2030 globally to invest in much needed infrastructure, particularly to secure adequate energy, water, agriculture, and transportation. The chairman asked me to talk about China. What about China? China alone will have to raise up to $243 billion annually of additional funds from now till 2020 in order to adequately finance to curb the impacts of climate change and the impact of low carbon development, according to our government NDRC's estimates. So now I want to share with you at Eco Forum Global what's the message we bring from China. Sorry, we didn't bring Panda, but the message is eco-civilization. So you must have question about what is eco-civilization and why now and why China. I want to amaze you by showing you a picture. This is a picture on People's Daily last week when I was attending another great conference in Copenhagen, the Global Green Growth Forum. It is a big plastic tent. Anybody has any clue what it is? I show you another picture. This is the inside. This magnificent structure, the size is about 3 football square. The height is 36 meters. We are not doing any kind of secret military project inside this. We are not trying to win the bidding for the 2020 Olympic, building another bird's nest. This is in a city called Hangzhou, in the province of Zhejiang, in the east coast of China, capital city. The GDP per capita in that city is about more than $15,000. So in China, where you have the national in average GDP per capita less than $7,000, this is a very well developed city. And in the past 30 years, their economy has grown very fast. Previously, this piece of land is in the suburb of the city, and it is occupied by a chemistry plant. Now, because of the expanding of the city, growing of the population, this land is now very valuable. It's actually become a city center. So the chemical plant has been moved, and a new developer coming, trying to turn this into $1 million of commercial real estate project. And they find a problem. They now know that people cannot just live in the building being built in this piece of land because of 30 years of pollution. The earth, the ground has been badly polluted. So they started 3 years ago a project trying to clean up the earth, the ground. And the pollution was so bad that the methods they used, the ground, the earth, sends out very bad smell, polluted air. So the neighbors around this piece of land call for a stop of the projects. But the developer definitely cannot let this land just rest there forever. So they come up with this big, maybe the 8th, 10th wonder of the world, invented building a big plastic tent to do the earth cleaning inside it. So the air, the polluted air is now coming out. So the reason I'm showing this is we at China Now, after 30 years of fast growing of economy, unfortunately, we find the most developed areas, regions in China in the east coast, we followed the same steps as the Western developed countries. Polluting first, trying to clean up later. But we know that we have another billion of people living in the inland, west part of China. And those are the future of us. China, India together counts about 50% of world population. All the developing countries together, that's about 70% world population. We cannot stop our countrymen to trying any efforts to pursue for a better life that citizens of Switzerland can enjoy. But we know that the past growing model is not sustained. We heard from yesterday, if we do so, we need another planet, which is impossible, although we can build this magnificent tent. So we think, if we look at the history, we find in the Stone Age, human beings respect the nature. We live in caves at that time, and we eat meat or whatever we can find on the trees or on the ground in a very simple life to just satisfy some basic needs of living. That period of time lasts about 10,000 years. And then we move to the agricultural civilization. Nomads, farmers, we trying to cooperate with Mother Nature. And that period lasts about 3,000 years. And then we move to the great, magnificent industrial civilization. We invented machines. What we do, we trying to conquer the Mother Nature. How long this lasted? Till now, about 300 years. So we see through the migration of the civilization, every time we become powerful, smarter, stronger, we're trying to ask more from the nature. The result is every civilization period, the time gets shorter. Someone will say it's actually better. Now we have better technology, better living standards. But we know, everybody in this room knows this is not sustainable. So we think we need to live with Mother Nature in a harmonious relationship. And we trying to define this, call this as an eco-civilization. And how eco-civilization is different from the sustainable development? With all the respect, sustainable development, this concept has been introduced by International Union of Conservation of Nature, IUC, 22 years ago in Rio. It has three major pillars: social equality, environmental protection, and economic growth. But we feel something fundamental is missing, is a value system, ethics, is something fundamental. In the past 2 days, in many of the projects, panels, discussions, we know that in the past 20 plus years, we have tried a lot of things. People in this room has worked very hard trying to promote sustainable development projects, sustainable infrastructure development projects, and so on. We tried very hard, we work very hard, we fight this battle very hard. But the progress we have received is unfortunately still linear. We haven't reached the tipping point. We cannot scale up in this way. Many projects we talk about, it's fighting within the same box. All the system setups, the global governance, the banking systems, the capitalism societies, a lot of the rules are against that what we should do. So we feel Fundamentally, we need to change the value system. We need to change the ethics. We need to change our living standards, consumer habits, living habits, how politicians work with each other, how the UN different agencies, sovereign countries, and civil societies should cooperate and working with each other. So we think we need to introduce a broader umbrella concept. We put a name as eco-civilization. Maybe it's wrong. We just don't know how to define it at this moment. But we feel we need a broader platform than the sustainable development concept, with all the respect, for all of us in this 21st century to develop an eco-society. So China is now taking a leadership in the initiative of promoting eco-civilization. This can and should benefit it directly in this critical development phase of its own, both socially and economically. But we also believe strongly, at the same time, this initiative intends to be part of a wider restructuring process that can influence developing and developed countries and internationally. So, ladies and gentlemen, with a short message from the organizers that asked me to deliver, the Eco Forum Global EFG is going to holding hands together with GIB, going to hold a small panel forum during the EFG Summer Summit this July in China. And we hope you will bring your knowledge, experience, your projects, your mandates to participate in our forum. We hope there you will find similar, very enthusiastic, challenging, thought-provoking panels and discussions. You will find your potential investors. You will find your projects interested for needing for investment. So that's a little promotion that I'm asked to deliver at this time. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Zhang. Thank you very much, Alex, for a very nice presentation and bringing us on board in the Chinese concept of eco-civilization. Thank you very, very much. May I now turn to Mr. Thomas Velakut, who is the CEO of WWF Switzerland. Please, Thomas.
Thank you, and I'm delighted to be here. I should, however, start with two apologies. First of all, I am not Samantha Smith, who was supposed to speak here. Unfortunately, she's had an illness in the family and has not been able to travel to Switzerland. So whether you like it or not, you're stuck with me. Second apology, I do realize I am what stands between you and the delights of happy hour in Basel. So I shall try and speed up and get through this presentation. I'm impressed that this many people are here on a Thursday afternoon at almost 5:30. So delighted to be here. I'm here from WWF, and what I'd like to do is just make the link a bit between what you've been talking about these last 2 days about financing sustainable infrastructure and some of the policy discussions that are going on at a global level regarding climate change. And I was struck looking at this conference just at how topical the theme of these 2 days were, because you're really bringing together here three key levers when we talk about climate change: cities, infrastructure, and finance. And what I'd like to do is just speak to each of those really quickly in terms of how are they affected by climate change and what role can they play in providing solutions when it comes to climate change, and how we as WWF interact with them. So starting off with cities, well, clearly we've all become aware of just how dangerous climate change is. It's not something that's happening in the far future, it's something that's happening today. And at least since Lord Stern came out with his estimations about the economics of climate change, we're also very aware that climate change has real, tangible economic consequences today. But I think what's really hit us over the last 2 or 3 years is just how big those economic consequences of climate change are. And the numbers are just staggering. So just to pick one, a recent study showed that the cost of natural disasters in Asia alone was estimated to be $53 billion a year. Now, a lot of those natural disasters are obviously linked to climate change, and the ADB was commenting that the expense of responding to those natural disasters could easily wipe out the gains from economic growth. So we're talking about a very real economic factor. And that was the good news. The bad news is things are getting worse. And again, I don't want to take you through a lot of data. Just one quote from the recent IPCC assessment report that said the following: throughout the 21st century, climate change impacts are projected to slow down economic growth, make poverty reduction more difficult, further erode food security, and prolong existing and create new poverty traps, the latter particularly in urban areas and emerging hotspots of hunger. And there, of course, we come straight to the theme of cities, and that cities will be particularly affected by the negative effects of climate change. Part of it simply by the fact that a lot of them are in low-lying areas, coastal areas. 1 billion people live in coastal areas today, a large part of that in urban centres. Then there's the urban poor that will be especially affected by climate change. So really cities are going to suffer very much from these effects. Now cities obviously are also part of the solution, and we've heard a lot of that in these last 2 days. It starts with simply the importance of cities, and these are numbers which you've already heard, that already today over 70% of global carbon emissions come from cities. So if we want to do anything about climate change, we better get serious about doing things in cities. And if we look at the population development, of course, urbanization leading to, by 2030, a sizable majority of the world population living in cities. So the weight of cities is just going to increase. Now, the good news is a lot is going on in cities. So cities are really galvanizing action on climate change. Just to give you 1 or 2 examples, I'll start with one which we are, as WWF, very closely involved in, which is the Earth Hour City Challenge, where we work with cities worldwide on their sustainable development path, or their path to ecological civilization. I shall change my wording on that in future. I'm very fond of that concept. Also things like the World Mayors Council on Climate Change with its Nantes Declaration, the OECD roundtables bringing together ministers and mayors, or the Cities Initiative at the UN Climate Summit. So there's all these initiatives going on because I think a lot of people in cities, also a lot of mayors, are very aware that this issue of climate change is one that goes straight to the heart of the development agenda of their cities. But having said that cities are really important, I think it's important to say something else, which is cities can't solve this on their own. And very often in sort of climate negotiations, you get frustrated about the slow pace of governments moving, national governments. And a lot of people then sort of look to the cities and say, oh, the cities will solve it for us. That is not fair, because cities can't do it on their own. A lot of the electricity grid, the water grid, things like the road system, but also legislation, pricing schemes, a lot of that gets set at national level. So cities on their own can't do that. So I think we have a big interest to work together with cities to put pressure on national governments to send a very clear message to national governments that we need to get serious about tackling climate change. Second theme of this conference, infrastructure. Well, obviously infrastructure is very affected by climate change. If you get changes in weather patterns, if you get severe weather events, if you get rising sea levels, then that impacts directly on infrastructure. And it impacts on infrastructure in different ways. Obviously, immediately, when you have a severe weather event that hits a city, you're going to get damaged infrastructure. But also more long-term, for example, if you've got shifts in climate conditions and all of a sudden the infrastructure in place is no longer suitable to the kind of climatic conditions, and you have to start writing off infrastructure much faster than you would normally do. Huge financial consequences. Now again, infrastructure is clearly part of the solution. That starts simply with the fact that 1/3 of global carbon emissions come from buildings, for example. So if we want to do anything about climate change, we can't do it without addressing the challenges that come from constructing new buildings, but also from retrofitting existing buildings. And the infrastructure that will be built in the next 5 years will basically determine whether the planet can be put on a 2 degrees compatible growth path, so on a path that avoids the worst consequences of climate change. Or to quote from a report of the IEA, if action to reduce CO2 emissions is not taken before 2017, all the allowable CO2 emissions would be locked in by energy infrastructure existing at that time. So that just gives you a sense of the urgency we have in addressing these issues around infrastructure. We do not have 50 years for this. We've got a few years because every year we wait after that, we'll be retrofitting things and things will become a lot more expensive. That's why this sense of urgency. And there are many levers when it comes to infrastructures. There's a huge development around green building codes, obviously renewable energy, public transport, the whole theme of reliance of an economic system that relies on fossil fuel and how can we transition out of that system. And WWF works with a lot of different actors on this infrastructure agenda. That starts with partnerships we have with individual cities, with initiatives of cities, but also working with property developers. We've just signed a cooperation agreement on climate change with one of the world's largest property developers. It's those kind of actions. We can't do this alone. It's about finding partnerships and working with partners together towards sustainable infrastructure. And then, of course, there's finance. And, you know, we won't get there without addressing finance and the way infrastructure is financed. And again, the financial sector, I'm a former banker, as every decent Swiss citizen is. And, you know, if you look at this, you can look at the financial sector is affected by climate change in different ways. It's affected on the risk side, but also on the opportunity side. On the risk side, we heard some of these figures already. Carbon Tracker, the organization, says that only 20% of the remaining fossil fuel resources worldwide can be safely burned. So there's this huge danger that a lot of those resources out there are actually, in effect, stranded assets. And investors are now clamoring to find out what their exposure to carbon is and how they can manage that exposure to avoid being caught in a carbon bubble. So that's the risk side. Then there's the opportunity side, clearly. And there's a huge need for finance. We've heard about some of this from the earlier speakers today. A huge need for finance. Ceres and the IEA estimated that approximately $1 trillion per annum needs to be invested into clean energy alone into clean energy alone to make the shift until 2050 to avoid the most dangerous effects of climate change. Then there's adaptation to climate change, which is in addition to that. And the numbers are a bit more fuzzy there, but just to give you one, for Africa alone, it's estimated that we'll need $350 billion per year for adaptation. And the financial sector, we need to look to the financial sector to work on some of the solutions there, to develop market-based solutions in addition to what governments do in terms of setting the framework conditions. And at the end of the day, you know, if we talk about a system today where 70% of global carbon emissions come from burning fossil fuel, if we address the way that we invest in fossil fuel, that's a pretty good place to start, and a place where we can get a lot done in terms of shifting towards a sustainable, a clean development path. And we work as WWF very much there with investors on the one hand, looking at how they can move out of fossil fuels. And the last 2 or 3 years have been amazingly encouraging there. Just seeing institutions such as the World Bank, seeing institutions such as multilateral development banks, but also sovereign wealth funds, institutional investors moving out of fossil fuels, moving out of coal beyond, in a first instance, and moving into renewable energies. And that is a seismic shift we're currently seeing. Now, if we look out to the future, and just the next 2 years are going to be absolutely essential when it comes to climate change, the so-called road to Paris via Lima, in terms of the 2015 UNFCCC conference in Paris, by which time we need a global agreement binding commitments by governments that put us on a 2-degree compatible pathway. Now, how will we get there? The million-dollar question. Well, we need to send very, very clear messages to governments that it's now or never that we need these 2-degree compatible commitments. Because I tell you, it's not just the natural climate out there that's heating up, it's the political climate that's heating up. I've never seen this much pressure being put on governments by the forces of yesterday, the forces that want us locked in a carbon-based economy, to keep us hostage to a carbon-based economy. They are basically fighting for their survival, and they have very, very deep pockets. So we better build up a lot of pressure to counter that if we want to come to a positive conclusion. And the positive thing there is, again, I'm amazed by how much is shifting, and how in this last 2 or 3 years, all of a sudden, we are developing coalitions between businesses, some of the largest companies on this planet, between cities, between civil society organizations, between indigenous people. You know, there's these huge coalitions coming together, working towards an ecological civilization or a sustainable development path. And that is hugely encouraging for us. And I do sense that something is genuinely changing there. And you start seeing this in the numbers. Last year was the first year where we've had more investment in renewable energy than in conventional energy. Something big is changing, because all of a sudden we've got business models becoming possible, sustainable business models that were not possible 5 years ago because of the development, for example, of the prices of renewable energies. So something big there is changing. And I'd like to just leave you with a quote by Thomas Friedman, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He said the following: "Big breakthroughs happen when what is suddenly possible meets what is desperately necessary." And we are in a situation today where all of a sudden business models and corporation models become possible that were not possible 5 years ago, and that will allow us to find sustainable solutions that are so desperately necessary. We'll only do that together. Please consider this an invitation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vellacott, for actually concluding this entire 2 days with very wise words. And if maybe from my perspective, if I may just add one thing, what you said, and I think what many of the speakers and participants here have discussed. When it comes to cities, absolutely correct. There is a limit of what they can do. At the same time, we know as ICLEI, as C40, as other major networks of cities that a lot is being going on. We have come together as major networks in a partnership that we will announce and get hopefully stamped by United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on the 23rd of September, where we will engage together to make it transparent what cities are actually doing worldwide. We know that in the absence of an international agreement today, 1/7 of the urban population is already under targets and under measures, be it mitigation or adaptation, just done at the local level with local financing and with all the efforts that local leadership is investing into it. We know that there are many more out there, but it's not yet transparent. We want to bring it to transparency. We're going to report, and that's the commitment, we're going to report until Paris what actually is happening on the ground, in the hope that this will be pressuring national governments to actually start really engaging and supporting the local actions, local government, subnational government actions on the ground. We think that as we see the negotiations advancing, we will see Paris still with a gap that it needs to be closed. And I think, or we think, that the local actions can actually contribute. And so this will be one of those things that we want to commit to, we want to engage into, and hopefully also towards Paris, bring that as a pressure element, at least from the local government perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that this panel was an excellent panel. Thank you all very, very much, and please, can I ask you for your applause for all our panelists. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to invite the chairman of the Global Infrastructure Basel, Daniel Wiener, for his final and concluding words. Please, Daniel, and once again, thank you so much for having us here over the last 48 hours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gino. Thank you for your excellent moderation. I won't keep you long. I have just 2 or 3 words to say. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for being here. I would like to thank all the panelists, all the speakers, all the contributors. But I think it's also a good occasion that we all thank the team that organized this. It's not only me, it's not me, it's the team. And please give a hand to the team that helped you through these days. Thanks very much. That was my most important concluding remark, actually, because there's so much to say and there would be so many things that we would have to address now that it would keep you very long. But I can promise that we have taped everything, we have recorded all the discussions, and we will really be very diligent in gathering all the information, gathering all the topics and also the arguments that came here in order to promote sustainable infrastructure finance and to keep the promise that we want to contribute to mainstreaming sustainable infrastructure for finance in order to move the needle in the direction that this panel just talked about. I also want to tell Alex that you didn't bring the panda, but Basel is currently procuring pandas. So maybe in one of the next years, we will have WWF signals in our zoo, and I'm certainly going to invite you when they're here. It's a long, complicated, complex issue that I don't have to deal with. I have more complex issues actually to deal with when I want to promote sustainable infrastructure. And you can all help to continue the conversation. You know that this summit is just a milestone in an ongoing process, and it's ongoing also in the sense that we are also helping to inform Lima, Paris, and all these milestones And therefore, I'm happy to announce the next summit, which is going to take place in 1 year on the 27th and 28th of May 2015 here in Basel. So please book it into the agenda. And I conclude with the same words as Thomas concluded. Please consider this an invitation. Thank you and enjoy the evening. Bye-bye.